everyone, and welcome to another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, or where you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for tuning into the show and for supporting the station. If you have any questions or comments about this show or a past show, or if you have a suggestion for a future show, you can send an email to comment@am950radio.com. So on last week's show, we discussed how the current Republican regime in Washington is doing at least 14 of the things that King George and Parliament were doing in 1776, where the colonists, wrote in the Declaration of Independence these 27 grievances that they had. And we went through 14 of them that they were doing. And, this certainly indicates that the Republican Party has a desire for authoritarianism or autocracy, or whatever word you want to give it, in the United States today. Rather than democracy. I mean, in fact, they a lot of them would just as soon get rid of democracy. Especially the billionaires and the parties who fund them. They don't like it. They want to get rid of it. So I thought for this week's show, for this first segment, we're going to talk about authoritarianism a little bit. I mean, I've talked about it a few times on some prior shows, but I think it's good to just refresh our memories about this and have it in our mind as we, relate to what's going on in politics today to your everyday life, because these things will certainly do that. And keep that in mind when you're voting this fall. By the way, speaking of voting, the primary elections for, in Minnesota, the actual election date is August 11th. But you can vote early. So, if for those of you who want to take advantage of early voting, feel free to do that. But otherwise, the election date is August 11th. So make plans to vote in the primaries. So let's talk a little bit about some of the symptoms of authoritarianism and how they exist in the United States today. I mean, that's going to be my, part of my argument here is like, yeah, these are the symptoms. And yeah, you could argue that they are existing in the United States today. So, but before I get into those symptoms, one thing to remember, and when I tell my students this in my political science class that I teach, some of them are like, "What? They don't understand, or they haven't been told this part that people think, well, democracy, that's the great form of government, and people love democracy, and there's all kinds of democracies around the world." No, about 70% of the world's population lives under some authoritarianism system of government, not a democracy. Okay. So when you look at it from that standpoint, the United States is in the minority of countries with this democracy. And, which is why some people don't like it, don't like democracy. They prefer authoritarianism, and they're working to get rid of it. And, if you pay attention to what a lot of the Republicans are saying, you can see it's them. Okay. So here are some of the patterns or symptoms of authoritarianism, or again, if you want to call it autocracy, that's fine. So the first one is election manipulation. So I'm taping this show Thursday at noon. So tonight, the Great Orange One is going to be giving some sort of talk. I imagine it has to do about 2020 elections and trying to take over the 2026 elections or something. Who knows? But this is one of the symptoms where the authoritarianism party wants to change the rules in the middle of the game to, help them either get into power or stay in power if they've, already got there somehow. So they like to change the election rules. They make certain laws about who can vote, who can't. How many early voting hours you have. Do you need an ID? I mean, all these sorts of things, right? And gerrymandering. So all of these sorts of things, right? And then something to watch for this fall is going to be voter intimidation. Are a bunch of ICE agents going to be around your polling area? Right. So this whole concept of election manipulation to either get them in power or to keep them in power once they're in power. So, I mean, you can see some of this right now where, Republicans are trying to bend the rules to stay in power because they know that if they can't do it, they're not going to stay in power. The voters are going to vote them out of office. So they have to find a way to screw around with the election laws to stay in power. So, you're going to see some voter intimidation, I think, where you're going to get some militia groups or ICE agents or who knows, out there trying to intimidate people either not to vote at all, like don't bother coming, or, when people do come to try and get them to vote for the Republicans. So this is another reason, as I mentioned earlier, if you are, going to vote in the primaries and vote in the general election in November, vote early. Then you can avoid this sort of stuff. Right? So, it wouldn't surprise me to see ICE at some various polling locations across the country, or a bunch of armed people, in the states where carrying is legal, that you're going to see a bunch of people walking around with AK-47s, around polling places, trying to scare people or harass them. So that's one way. Another common one you see with authoritarian regimes is they get rid of the people who are running against them by barring them, for example, from the election or from the ballot. Like some countries, they just jail them, the opposition, like Putin does, right? Or they come up with some law or some rule that somehow disqualifies that person from running against the other party. Or trying to change the law so that the voters who support the opposition candidate can't vote or won't come out to vote, or those types of things. So, for example, in the United States, I mean, we've done that before, right? With the Jim Crow laws, with poll taxes, those sorts of things, all the things that we were doing before the Voting Rights Act that is now being gutted by the Supreme Court, as I've talked about before. So now it's going to be even harder for minority groups to vote or to get any representation for that matter, because now this gerrymandering in the House of Representatives is basically, the Supreme Court has basically said, you can do whatever you want now. Even if it's, a few weeks before the election, fine, do it. Right? So you're going to see more of this going on. So this is a way to stop minority people from getting any sort of representation. And again, this is not just in the House of Representatives at the federal level. This is in the state level, too, for the state legislatures. So Republican states who have already gerrymandering their state legislatures can do even more, thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court. So, again, this is what the regime wants. So they can stay in power. Or they convince enough people to, stay home. And that's another way they stay in power. Now, unfortunately, in 2024, this is one of the reasons why the Democrats lost is too many of them stayed home. And, look where we are now. So, make plans, then go out and vote, right? So another symptom of authoritarianism is weaponized government. Now, when I say weaponized, I'm not talking about, people actually carrying weapons around and that kind of stuff in the government itself. But what they do is they use the government as a weapon against the people that they don't like. So, of course, the regime loyalists are put in charge, put into power. And, as we've seen before, when Trump first took over, all the mass firings that happened with the federal workforce, right? You get rid of those people, you put in more regime loyalists, right? This is what Doge did. And again, the claim that, well, this is for waste, fraud, and abuse. No, Doge actually cost the U.S. government more money than if they hadn't done a damn thing. So, but that wasn't the purpose of it, right? The purpose of it was to get rid of the federal civil service people, a lot of the people who had worked in the government for years. Get rid of them, put in these stooges. That's what they're doing. And in many cases, these stooges have no experience at all in running these either agencies or in the job that they're being appointed to. I mean, you could see this yesterday with the confirmation hearings on Todd Blanche and Jay Clayton. I mean, just horrible hearings. But to the Republicans in charge, it's not going to matter to them. They know these people are idiots. They know that, for example, Todd Blanche, a federal court judge, has referred him to the New York State Bar Association for ethics violations, which, back in the day would disqualify you from being attorney general. Not with the current regime. They're like, hey, good. Some judge got pissed off at you. That must mean you're doing a good job. So these people who have no experience or they're just complete stooges to Trump, the Republicans are going to vote him in again, like they've done with all these other people, because they think this is a way for them to stay in power. And of course, they don't want to piss off Trump, so they go along and vote with it. So, which again, then these people are put in charge of these agencies, and then they just start firing all the competent people. I mean, Kash Patel's been doing that at the FBI ever since he started. Another part here about weaponizing government is they're going after judges or appointing loyalist judges. So again, when you watch some of these hearings for people who are nominated for judges, I mean, these Republicans can't even answer who won the election in 2020. They won't even bother trying to answer it because they know that'll piss off the orange one, and then he might get mad at them. But Republicans, because they're in charge, vote them in anyway. So they're putting loyalists in there for judges. Or for the ones they don't like, they're threatening them with violence if they don't rule in the favor of their regime. I mean, even Amy Coney Barrett was, in front of Congress saying, "Oh, all this violence is against me, and I got to wear a black jacket and all this stuff." Well, you might want to look at yourself in the mirror there, Amy, given your votes and how you are putting these people, you're letting these people do all these things. Right. And you voted to give, Trump immunity. Well, he's president. So, hey, what do you expect? So our current Supreme Court has 3 Trump appointees, and they, for the most part, they vote in his favor all the time. And of course, Department of Justice, I've talked a number of times on the show about how they are weaponized and trying and bringing these sham prosecutions against Trump's political enemies. And, in the end, a lot of them get dismissed, or the judges throw them out, or juries find these people not guilty. But, dragging these people through this and making them spend, a lot of money on lawyers. I mean, that's, part of the reason that Trump is doing this too. But, in the end, thankfully, a lot of that stuff isn't working. The next symptom is press intimidation. They don't like a free press that reports the truth about how bad they are. right, at governing and all the laws they're breaking, and all the conflicts of interest they have, and all the grifting they're doing. I mean, right now, they subpoenaed some reporters' records at the New York Times because they, had the gall to report about some problems with the plane they got from Qatar, that Trump got as a gift. This is how they act. They're trying to intimidate the press, right? Who could, they've taken over CBS, ran it into the ground. They're buying up all these different stations, right? This is how they do it. And then of course they have Fox lies, spewing propaganda 24/7. Right. And this is what they're going to be doing. So the latest attempt to merge a number of stations by the billionaire Republicans who are trying to do it, there's been a lawsuit filed, and I think Minnesota is one of the states that joined in that lawsuit. So, and then every time, the people, the reporters, write the truth, the administration's just like, well, it's just fake news. Or they threaten to sue the networks, and then the networks, because they're run by Republicans, let's not forget that, right? They just capitulate, just like a lot of the law firms capitulate. All right. And they replace some of the reporters with loyalists to the regime. So, this press intimidation is another one. So is normalization of extremism. Right? The regime targets groups, to scapegoat them and blame all their problems on them. Like the LGBTQ groups, right? Some religious groups that aren't white Christians, right? Immigrants, right? These are all enemies of the state. Blame your problems on these people. So this is all like trying to get extremism normalized. And now you got all these militia groups running around being part of MAGA, and violence is becoming more and more and more, as the Supreme Court justice has said. Well, this is what happens. And then, when Trump pardons all the J6ers and they go out and commit more crimes, why are you shocked? So the normalization of extremism is another one, and that is certainly going on today in the United States. Then the last one is declining democracy is, the last sign of declining democracy is the transfer of power crisis. So, of course, this happened with J6, despite what the Republicans say about that. They tried to stop the certification of the Electoral College. The autocrats lose elections, and they try and stay in power by throwing out elections, altogether, or a coup happens, or they, come out and say, well, there's election fraud, so we have to have a do-over or disqualify those people. Right? Does all this sound familiar? Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is what Trump's going to be talking about tonight. Again, Thursday night. And they're not held accountable for all this stuff. Right? And this is what happens when you appoint, Biden did, his presidency was notable for a number of things, but one of the negative ones was appointing milquetoast Merrick Garland as Attorney General, and he didn't do a damn thing to hold all these people accountable. Now, yeah, there were J6ers that were, charging all that, but not the people in power. And they get away with it, and they keep getting away with it, and and then I've talked before about how, well, if they commit federal crimes, Trump will just pardon them, so they get away scot-free. But we do have a chance to fight all of this off. Yeah, some institutions have been damaged, but we can change that. Voting is one thing, of course, people can do. So the Democrats, you need to get the turnout rate back up. If all the number of Democrats that voted for Biden in 2020, if they show up again, 2020 for the 2026 elections, it's going to be a good election for the Democrats. But if you don't, then we could have the regime staying in power in the House and the Senate. Because I think the Democrats, you have a shot at taking both the House and the Senate. But, as I've said a number of times, you cannot poll turnout, right? Just because Democrats are ahead in a lot of the polls, and, not all of them, but a lot of them, you can't poll turnout. So if people don't show up to vote, well, all that goes for naught. So you got to get out to the polls. I mean, that's how Trump and the Republicans won in 2024. The largest voting bloc in the United States in 2024 were the people that didn't vote. Right? So I think people are becoming more and more aware of the overreach and extremism of this regime. But, are they actually going to do something to try and combat it other than complain about it? Well, voting is certainly one way, but you can also protest, and do more things like that. And just realize that, the Republican Party is trying to kill our democracy. And, once the Democrats get back into power at some point, right, they need to start making the reforms to fix the system. Right, so I've talked about a few of these previously, but, if the Democrats just don't do anything again, well, we're going to run into the same cycle. So remember that we, the people, are the only ones that can save ourselves and save our democracy. We have to strive to make it, even better improvements. We have to stay vigilant, support our community, so that we can make the improvements to make the United States a more perfect union. All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, I'm going to talk about some economic stuff. So we'll do that on the other side of the break here on the Politics Matter Show. All right, welcome back to the Politics Matter Show. I'm Bruce Klopfleisch, your host. So let's talk about some economic news. I mean, I normally do that periodically on this show, so I haven't done one for a while, so let's do one now. Because Republicans love to say, well, the economy's just fine. Well, have you tried to buy a computer lately? Or some, software for your computer, or some, hardware for your computer, right? It's like the average cost of computers are up 10 to 20%. And a lot of this is being driven by massive investments in AI infrastructure, like the data centers. I'll talk about that here in a bit. So this is creating, shortages in computer chips and that sort of thing, and which increase costs. This is basic economics, right? And this is especially true for memory chips. And for those, prices have quadrupled here lately. So Apple has now increased the prices on their iPads and MacBooks by 15 to 25%. Microsoft has recently announced they're going to up their Xbox consoles by $100. Right, and all this increased demand has raised prices, and it's probably going to stay that way. If not it's probably going to go even higher. I suspect. But yeah, don't expect that stuff to go down anytime soon. So, when you see the computers jump up like that's like, well, there's lots of other things going wrong in the economy too, besides that one. But that's for a lot of us. If you've looked around lately, it's like, man, those prices are up, and they're just going to stay up or get any higher. The latest inflation numbers are out, which inflation was up 3.5% annually in June. So that was down from May, which was 4.2%. Now, remember, I've said this a number of times, and I'll continue to say this. Well, yeah, if you believe the numbers from this regime, I don't believe them. I believe they're worse than what they're putting out there. And of course, they're not going to say that because it'll, the truth will actually hurt them. But again, as I've done before, it's like, okay, let's just use their numbers. Okay. So yeah, the drop was, there was a drop, but still 3.5%. That is over the 2% number that the Federal Reserve targets in this country. So we're still not even close to the 2%. And one reason why that it dropped was energy prices were down. Well, now that we're bombing Iran again, and now that the Strait of Hormuz is closed again, guess what's going to happen to the price of gas? I mean, I was driving around yesterday, and the price of gas just jumped. I mean, it's almost at $4 again in some places. So if that holds, that inflation number is not going to stay at 3.5% for next month or for July. Another one that's continually up is the price of food. So that went up another 0.2%, which was the same amount as it was in May. So food like meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy products, cereal, and bakery products went up. Do you think that these things are going to go down anytime soon? No. This is how big grocery works, right? Is when they raise prices, this just gives them an excuse to keep raising them and raising them and raising them. They're not going to come down anytime soon. So, this increase in food prices, this is not going to help people on SNAP or the over 4 million who have been kicked off SNAP recently under the big horrible bill. Not to mention the cost for, the food pantries around the country that, buy food to stock their shelves. They're going to have to start paying more. Right? The people who donate food, they're going to have to start paying more. Higher and higher prices. It's just going to keep going up and up. Everybody was like, oh, the price of eggs under Biden was so high. Well, where are they now? Another thing that's nearly doubled in price has been jet fuel. I mentioned before how I bought my plane tickets early for a trip that I'm taking in August. So thank God I did that. Otherwise, I'd be paying a lot higher for tickets. Because, of course, the airlines pass that jet fuel cost on to the customer. So jet fuel, they spent $6.66 billion in May. That number was 84% higher than May of last year. So, hey, how do they react? They're going to raise their fares. They're going to raise their fees. They're going to start, they might even start cutting flights. They do that occasionally too. And this is only going to get worse if the Iran war continues. The U.S. trade deficit is up to $77.6 billion in May. So exports, as in, us selling stuff to the rest of the world, that went down 3.2% to $317.7 billion. While imports, stuff we buy from other countries, rose 3.3%. So that's now up to $395.3 billion. So the trade deficit is up 42% from April. So much for those tariffs working, Republicans, right? Who could have known? Well, most economists did, right? I teach that in my econ classes. Economists, they argue about all kinds of things, but tariffs is not one of them. Unless you're a lackey for the regime, no, tariffs do not work. And this is more evidence of it. Right? And Trump's still trying to get more tariffs on, even after the Supreme Court says he doesn't have the power. But he's trying to find more ways. And he keeps claiming, well, the trade deficit is going down. No. It just went up 42% from April. But who's making money? Right? The top 5 banks in the United States made record second quarter profits this year, beating Wall Street expectations for them. So I got a few numbers here. I didn't get one for the fifth one, which is Citigroup, but JP Morgan, $16.9 billion profit. And again, this is just for the second quarter. This is just for April, May, and June. In 3 months, they made nearly $17 billion in profit. And a lot of that, 86% of that was made due to their equity trading. It's not because they're, getting all this interest from loaning out all this money to people. No, they're trading in the stock market. Right? Wells Fargo. Their profits went up 22% to $6.4 billion. Goldman Sachs was up to $6.6 billion. Bank of America was up, their profits were up $9.1 billion. Again, I couldn't find a number for Citigroup or Citibank. But record profits. And again, this just tells you, as I've said before, how income inequality is getting worse and worse and worse. And this is just another symptom of it. Right? The banks are rolling in the money while people are getting kicked off SNAP. Gas prices are going up. Food prices are going up for, us, the regular people. But boy, the banksters are making out billions of dollars, record profits. Home prices are going up. So the median price, meaning, this is like the halfway point price in the United States right now is $440,600. Yeah, $440,600. This is an all-time high based on data that goes back to 1999 when they first started, keeping track of this. So, first-time home buyers, younger people, young families, good luck. Finding a decent house. Maybe you can still find one of the lower price ones, but the median is like the average, $440,600. Who's driving up those prices? Who's buying a lot of those houses? It's the private equity firms, right? They buy up the houses, and since they're the ones that can afford them, and then they rent them out to people at outrageous rent prices. Or sell them for even more money to, more rich people. So another thing that is in the news is, of course, AI. So over 200 economists, and 16 of them are Nobel Prize winners in economics, wrote a letter saying institutions, quote, must act now, close quote, to address how AI could transform the economy and put many people out of work. So I've mentioned this before, right? AI, for some people is great, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to lose their jobs. What are you going to do with those people? What jobs are they going to take? And then there's the issue of regulating AI. So the current regime, they don't want to do it. These AI companies are giving them a lot of money. So they're trying to ban states from regulating them. And, with all the money that the rich people are pumping in there, they don't care how AI affects us. They don't care if people lose jobs. They don't care if more people need government help. It's more profit for them. So speaking of AI, the state of New York just did a 1-year moratorium. So I believe they're the first state in the country that has passed a moratorium on data centers. Now, again, this is just 1 year, but still, it's something, and I think this is going to be a growing trend. In Minnesota, the city of Eagan was recently sued for passing a 1-year moratorium on data centers for their city. So they got sued on June 15th, 2026 from a firm called Eagan Capital, which already owns a data center in Eagan. And, Eagan passed this ordinance on February 17th, 2026 for a year. And Eagan Capital filed this lawsuit claiming that the ordinance is unlawful. So again, I think you're going to see more and more of this too, as more and more cities do these moratoriums. These data center, rich people aren't going to like it, so they're going to threaten or ultimately will sue these cities. So this is going to end up probably in the state Supreme Court, at least here in Minnesota, with this lawsuit and perhaps more. because more cities are starting to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this case in a future show. But basically, the argument that that Egan Capital is using is, well, the city doesn't have the power to do this. It has to be the state, or it has to be the Public Utilities Commission, which regulates electricity in the state of Minnesota. So they're basically arguing, well, the city doesn't have this power, so get rid of the moratorium. So that's their basic argument. But again, I'll talk more about this in a future show here. So this whole thing about data centers and this lawsuit is intensifying the conflict between business interests and local governments, as people around the country, I think initially were like, oh, data centers, but now it's like, now that they know how it's affecting their city, how it's affecting their electric rates, how it's affecting their water supply, how it's affecting their air quality and all this sort of stuff, and how a lot of the cities are doing this secretly and getting tax breaks and all these other things. This is a case where a lot of people from both parties, these are not just Democrats, complaining about this. There's a lot of Republicans complaining about this too. They don't want it in their city. And the businesses are like, well, you're going to lose all these jobs. Well, yeah, to maybe build something, but the point of AI is to get rid of the workers. So once it's built, there aren't going to be that many workers, at these places. And then the last one is, boy, you don't want to live next to these places because that noise is loud. So this is something to watch for you, in the court system. You're going to see more and more of this, and you may live in a city who is dealing with data centers. So this is something to watch for. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, going to talk about unfortunately, some more murders by ICE. So we'll talk about that here on the Politics Matter show. All right, welcome back to the Politics Matter show. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So, another week in America, another 2 ICE murders in America. Our tax dollars at work. How do you like, supporting an agency that goes around killing people in the streets of America? Because that's some of your tax dollars are going to do that. Well, just this in the past week, we've had 2 more innocent people getting killed in the streets of America. So there's one in Houston, and one is it Biddeford, I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not sure about that, but up in Maine. Right, and these 2 people weren't even the targets of the ICE investigations that ended up getting them killed. So somehow, and I'm not sure how ICE is managing to do this other than they're just incompetent fools, as I've said before. But how are ICE messing up and going after they end up getting the wrong people all the time. Now here we got 2 more people shot down in the streets. And these are 2 more cases like Renee Good's case where they're claiming, oh, I was going to get run over by the driver of the car. No, you weren't. I mean, if you look at, the video and some of the witnesses that have said stuff, no, nothing like that. But this is their common excuse, right? And in the shooting in Maine, actually the agents didn't claim and say they were scared for their own safety. They said, well, they did it to protect the public safety. And if you see the video, there's nobody around, other than the victim, his daughters, 3-year-old daughters in the car, as I understand it, and the at least from what I saw, two ICE officers. That's it. Out on the road. And what public safety? No. These are just plain and simple 2 more murders. despite what they claim, right? ICE and DHS. I mean, there's nobody in the streets in Maine, and they just shot him anyway. I mean, and there's some footage from a nearby business that, shows the ICE officers running up to the car. The car's not running them over, right? And then here's the thing. And if I have enough time, I'll talk about this towards the end of the segment too. But in both of these shootings, there's no body cam tape, no body cam evidence. I thought this was part of the deal to end the shutdown. They got $70 billion with a B dollars, and part of the deal was they were supposed to have body cameras on. Well, these guys didn't conveniently. Or I've heard some reporting out there that, well, maybe they did, but they didn't turn them on. Big shock. Right? I mentioned this when they did this deal. Just because you're supposed to be wearing body cams doesn't mean, A, that these agents would, or B, yeah, maybe they have them on, but that doesn't mean they're going to turn them on, that they're going to be operating at the time of the shooting, or, before the shooting, showing you what's going on before they actually have to shoot someone, or even after the shooting, right? This is just another unenforceable policy against ICE, which is, just running around being totally unaccountable. Now that they got $70 billion more dollars, now they're shooting people again, apparently. So I hope that the local authorities, get evidence and, charge these people. And then you heard the Tom Homan, who was basically the czar, if you will, of these deportation things. Right? He came out and said, "Okay, we're going to suspend, basically shooting into the cars. After these murders happened." Well, and about, I don't know, was it even a few minutes later? Not very long. President Trump comes out and says, "Well, no, we're not going to suspend that. We're going to keep doing it. Keep doing it, ICE. You're great. Keep it up." After 2 people have just been killed. I mean, that just goes to show you what Trump thinks of all this stuff. He doesn't care if people die in the streets. He doesn't care if his own agents kill people. He's happy that they're doing this. And the body count just keeps going up. And I've said before, these shootings in the cars violates ICE's own policy. And, pretty much every law enforcement agency has this policy where you're not supposed to shoot into cars. And ICE has it, but they're not following it. And then even when Tom Homan comes out and says, "Well, we're going to stop doing this," well, Trump says, "No, we're going to keep doing them." And Homan was out there saying, "Well, we're going to stop doing this because we want to look at these cases and see, look at these for training purposes." Well, Tom, if you've bothered to train these officers, they wouldn't be doing this stuff. And we've covered before how little training these officers are getting. And a lot of these guys are just, they want to have their badge and their gun and they're going to go out and use it. Because, ICE is taking just about anybody off the street who wants to do that. And here we got 2 more dead people. So I really hope that this training issue comes up if any of these cases go to trial, in a court of law, because we're going to find out, I think, that these agents weren't even trained about, the policy about shooting at vehicles. Or if they were, like, what training, if they were trained, well, what training did you get? It's probably hardly going to be any. Their training is probably going to be, well, shoot first, ask questions later. Right? So this is what they're doing. And if it's proved that these agents, didn't get any training or they didn't follow their training, the state can use this to argue that these agents did not act like a reasonable agent would under the circumstances. And this is how the state of Minnesota, for example, in their prosecutions, can defeat the self-defense claims or the immunity claims of these officers, is to show that, no, they didn't act reasonably, or they didn't do what their training said that they should be doing. But I'm sure Susan Collins is, real concerned about this. Right? Let's not forget, Susan Collins was the deciding vote to give ICE $70 billion to end the shutdown. And now she's so concerned that, people are showing up at her offices and protesting. Oh, my God. And then she comes out to the press and says, well, I was the one that got the body cam deal done. Well, it didn't help, did it, Susan? You got a dead person. One of your constituents is dead in your state. And then she says, well, I talked to Tom Homan and got this deal where they wouldn't fire into the vehicles. Well, Trump just screwed your deal, Susan. Please, people in Maine, don't vote her back in office again. She's not doing anything for you. Don't do it. Now, the Attorney General, I believe in Maine, is a Democrat, and I think he's come out and said he's going to try and investigate, much like Mary Moriarty's doing here in Hennepin County. Or, if it isn't the AG's office, well, then some, local DA is going to be, able to investigate these cases, because, you gotta hold these people accountable. Right, as I talked about in the first segment, one of the things about authoritarianism is you don't hold people accountable for what they're doing, for breaking the laws. These people need to get charged. And then in the one in Houston's like, what has Ken Paxton said about this? I tried to find some stuff. Nobody's really asking him what's going on, but I'm sure he's supporting what ICE did. He's from Texas, and what do you expect? All right, so stay out of the smoke. We'll talk to you next week.